This is a update for everyone who has signed up to receive updates about the slag pile and the ongoing efforts to stop the contamination and clean up the contamination in Cottonwood. So some exciting things are developing. I'd like to give just a brief overview of what has happened, where we're at now, and what the plan of action would be for, or what our plan of action is, what my plan of action is moving forward. So back in 2008, a company called Minerals Research came to Cottonwood to propose processing the slag. So located at the center of town lies approximately 3 million tons of copper mining waste called slag. And this particular company, Mineral Research, had been processing slag in Ajo, down by Tucson, and crushing it into a dust and selling it as a sandblasting abrasive. And since the copper slag here came from a single smelter, they thought that since that pile there was running low, they were looking for a new place to take their business and to have copper slag to process, and they thought Cottonwood would be a great place to do it. And of course, Cottonwood and its residents had many concerns, so there were multiple meetings that were held, planning and zoning meetings, city council meetings, community meetings, where this whole thing was discussed. And basically, Minerals Research came in and said, we know you're concerned. We know there's concerns of toxicity. What's in the slag? How toxic is it? When we crush it into a dust, will that dust disperse in the community? Will that create health problems? Blah, blah, blah. And in response to these citizen concerns, Mineral Research had said that because they had been operating in Ajo, they have a perfect track record, a really great track record to come to Cottonwood. They said in these meetings in response to citizen concerns that they had never received a single complaint from neighbors over dust issues. They said that they were regulated by the Department of Environmental Quality and had never received a citation from them. Which is amazing and would show a really great history. And they said that the slag dust had been tested and it does not pose any harm, any risk to human health. And based off of those assertions, the city of Cottonwood officials felt really confident that they would do a good job in Cottonwood since they never had any environmental complaints, never had any complaints from residents, and it was safe and non-toxic. So they issued them a conditional use permit. After people started getting sick, and my own child started getting sick, I performed a comprehensive oversight investigation into Mineral Research and everything that has taken place. And what I discovered was they lied when they came to Cottonwood. They had well over a dozen complaints from residents. There were so many complaints that a community meeting was held where the president of Mineral Research flew out and assured them that he would do everything that he could to stop the dust contamination and listen to all the health problems that they were having and how it was coating all of their belongings and in their homes and on their pet bowls and all the health issues they were having, but assured them that he would take care of it. And of course, the complaints still came in after that because it is inherently a dust producing operation. That is their product. They crush the slag into a dust and then they stockpile it into mountains and then it just blows all over our community. And the reason that that's important, the reason it's important that they lied has to do with what we can do now. So we have been complaining, citizens have been complaining for close to 7 years now. And this project is set to continue for at least another 10, 15, maybe 20 years, depending on how much slag is actually there, which nobody really knows, and how fast they can crush it. So this has been going on for a while and is set to go on for a lot longer. And the reason that it's important that they lied is the action steps going forward. So we have, as citizens, we have three pathways to get relief from this. The first pathway is through the city of Cottonwood. So the city of Cottonwood issued them this conditional use permit and can revoke it or amend it at any point. And so the foundation of our conditional use permits in Cottonwood is called Section 302. And Section 302 says that a permit may be subject to review and possible revocation where a violation has occurred. And then they go to list out what violations give way to allow the city to revoke their permit. And one of the violations is that the approval was obtained by fraud or misrepresentation of a material fact. So we know, we have on record, they lied, saying that they had never had any complaints. They did. That they had never had any violations from the Department of Environmental Quality. They had at least 9. They were sued twice by the Department of Environmental Quality in the Superior Court and lost, signed consent decrees admitting that they had polluted. And they were labeled as a high priority violator. So they came into our meetings. At the meeting where they got their permit, a citizen stood up and said, "I'm really concerned because people from Ajo have complained about the dust. You said they didn't complain, and I have proof that they did." And in response to that woman's statement, they said, "Oh yeah, we've had some complaints from a disgruntled employee, but really what matters is that we're regulated by the Department of Environmental Quality and we've never had any citations from them. So we're good to go." And they had 9 citations and were sued twice and lost. And were named a high priority violator. So this was at the meeting where then they were granted their permit. So it was a material fact. It was a flat out lie. They knew it was a lie. And then they also said that it is not detrimental to human health. And item E of being able to revoke a permit under Section 302 says that if an operation is conducted and is detrimental to the health, safety, or general welfare of the public, or is considered to be an ongoing or habitual nuisance, the permit can be revoked. So if the operation is conducted detrimental to health, safety, or general welfare of the public, or is to be considered an ongoing or habitual nuisance, they can revoke the permit. So a petition, I put in a complaint with the city of Cottonwood. I submitted all of the evidence. I submitted all of the complaints that people had been in from Cottonwood who have been getting sick, the local business owners in the fallout zone, moms like myself with children who are getting sick from playing at the parks, the library, the rec center, all the fallout zone where the slag dust is. I submitted that to the city of Cottonwood. I submitted all the documentation from the Pima Department of Environmental Quality to show that they had many citations and that they were lied to, that they were sued in Superior Court. I submitted them all the documentation to show that this is a hazard to human health. There are many studies available on copper slag dust. We had it independently tested. Dr. Shadasina of Breakthrough Medicine had it independently tested and shows that it has very high levels of arsenic, aluminum, barium, lead. But the kicker is Mineral Research, because they sell this product on the open market, has to have what's called a materials data safety sheet. So anytime that you're selling a product that is potentially hazardous to human health, you have to put out the materials data safety sheet. So if somebody ingests it or breathes it in, they can look at your materials data safety sheet and know what they need to do to get help, and how toxic it is and what ways that it can be toxic. Their own materials data safety sheet, at the time they said in our meetings that it poses no risk to human health. Their own materials data safety sheet says it contains materials known to cause cancer, birth defects, and other reproductive harm. Their safety sheet says that their product is known to exacerbate respiratory disease, and that they make no guarantees that it is not harmful to the environment or human health. It states that it is likely their product contains arsenic in levels that are higher than allowable by government regulations, which independent testing shows that's accurate. It contains high amounts of arsenic. So their own materials data safety sheet that issues extreme caution when using it and what can happen to human health and the diseases that it can cause. Meanwhile, they're telling us in public meetings that it's totally safe. It's been proven. Its safety has been proven. Let us come crush slag in the center of your community, blanketing the children's facilities and low-income housing and veterans of foreign wars building, when their own materials data safety sheet says it's toxic and can harm human health, and they make no guarantees. So we have lots of proof and evidence that has been submitted to the city of Cottonwood. The city of Cottonwood responded by saying that they will not revoke their conditional use permit, although that's not what I requested. I requested that the city of Cottonwood hold a hearing so that evidence could be presented from both sides, which is the procedure. Nobody behind closed doors has the authority to just revoke somebody's permit. It must be done through hearing. So they said they're denying to revoke their permit, although that's not what I asked. I wanted a hearing. They said that they are beyond the statute of limitations for lying to planning and zoning, except there is no statute of limitations for Section 302, so that was made up. They said that there is not substantial evidence. I did not submit substantial evidence to show that it is detrimental to human health, even though their own materials data safety sheet shows that it is. And I attached many other scientific studies along with independent testing showing that it's harmful to human health. And they said that I did not meet the burden of proof to show that it was an ongoing or habitual nuisance, despite sending in a tremendous amount of complaints from residents and businesses showing that it is an ongoing and habitual nuisance. I'm not giving up on the city of Cottonwood, but that's one of the routes that we have as far as taking care of the shutting down the operations and requiring that they move elsewhere. They can crush their slag anywhere they want. They can make all the money they want. They can crush all the slag that they want. They just can't do it in the center of our city next to housing and businesses and children's facilities. They have never been able to control dust in their 30 plus year history. They've never been able to control dust in Ajo. They've never been able to control dust here. Any assertion that they can or will control the dust has been proven futile in all of their attempts in the last several decades. So it is inherently a toxic dust producing operation, and as such has no place in the center of a city. They need to take it elsewhere and crush it elsewhere, away from the environment, the rivers, the pets, the wildlife, the children, the residents of Cottonwood. Okay, so City of Cottonwood is one way. Second way is through ADEQ. So ADEQ is who is supposed to also be regulating the slag crushing company. In my investigation, I discovered that MRI needed a stormwater pollution and prevention plan in order to be able to begin operations. And so they put together this whole report on their stormwater pollution and prevention plan. And in that, they made a lot of inaccurate and false statements. For example, they said that one of the requirements is if you're around an impaired waterway, you need to do extra stuff. And they said they don't need to do any of that extra stuff because they're not around any impaired waterways, except for the Verde River is within a mile of their facility and is listed and registered as an impaired waterway. They said that their property does not create sedimentation. Sedimentation is when it rains and the water picks up materials and transports it downhill and then deposits those materials, in this case, the slag dust, to other places off facility. They said that that doesn't happen. Well, we have direct evidence to show that massive amounts of slag are being washed off of their facility into other parts of the community. So there are, and I'm not going to list all of the violations, but there's like 5 or 6 different places within their SWPPP where they have inaccurate statements. They were required by the city of Cottonwood to have an air quality permit through ADEQ before they could begin. And they were also required to have phase 2 environmental testing done. In fact, at 5 separate meetings, they were told and agreed at these public on the record meetings that they would get phase 2 environmental study. They have no air quality permit, despite the city of Cottonwood officials telling residents who are complaining that they have their required air quality permits and are passing all their inspections. They have no air quality permit. They submitted to ADEQ to get an air quality permit about a decade ago. And it came back. Whenever somebody submits for an air quality permit, they have to send in their engineering controls. And their engineering controls basically give an estimate of how much their potential to emit, their PTE. How much potential to emit toxic dust is your operation going to create? And it came back that their PTE was around 200 tons per year of dust emanating into the community, which is far beyond the threshold to need an air quality permit. And so it was determined back to MRI from ADEQ that yes, you do need an air quality permit because your potential to emit is high above the threshold. I think the threshold is somewhere around 80 to 90 tons per year. And if you're below that, you don't need an air quality permit. And if you're above that, you do. And they came back way above that. Well, MRI, Minerals Research, came back to ADEQ and said, even though our engineering controls show that we have a really high potential to contaminate the city with toxic slag dust, we sell the dust. You see, that's our product. So we're gonna collect all of that dust and sell it. It would be silly of us to just let it dissipate into the environment. So we're gonna collect it and sell it. So despite the fact that our engineering controls say we're gonna emit that, and we can't really prove that we can or will collect it, but we're saying we're gonna, we would prefer not to get an air quality permit because those are a pain in the butt. And ADEQ said, okay, I guess if you're gonna collect and sell the dust, that your engineering controls prove that you're gonna emit to the environment, we'll let you not have a air quality permit. Even though the city of Cottonwood requires you have an air quality permit, we're gonna give you a pass on that. So as far as I can tell, based off the documentation that I have received, and I've reviewed thousands and thousands of documents, they have no air quality permit. What they have is a letter from ADEQ stating because they're gonna collect the dust somehow magically, that they do not need an air quality permit. Despite the fact that the city of Cottonwood said that they need one, despite the fact that the city of Cottonwood is telling victims of the toxic slag dust when they complain that they have their permit, their air quality permit, and they pass all their inspections, I can't find an air quality permit anywhere. So it seems they don't have an air quality permit. They also never did the phase 2 testing. And this was required, like I said, at 5 separate meetings. City council meetings, planning and zoning meetings, community meetings. Every meeting, they were told, you need to do a phase 2 environmental study before operations can begin. The reason they didn't make them do that at the time is because in order for them to build their slag crushing plant, so there was the big slag pile, they had to move part of the slag pile to clear away space to be able to build their crushing facility. And until that slag was moved and they could get their equipment, which also has a potential to pollute, in place, that is when they would get their phase 2 environmental testing. And so they agreed before they would start operating that they would get the phase 2 environmental testing done, because at the time they were issuing the permits, they hadn't begun construction. They couldn't do the phase 2 permitting environmental testing yet. And so they were required The city has no records of any phase 2 environmental testing. I have a statement from the city saying that they possess no phase 2 environmental study from MRI, was required by MRI to give them, but they don't have it, which means they didn't do it. But yet the city still let them operate. And then, so these are the violations now that I have submitted to ADEQ. So they have inaccuracies in their stormwater pollution and prevention plan. They have no air quality permit as was required, and is a violation of the Clean Air Act. They did no phase 2 environmental testing as was required, and they have violations of their crushing and screening plant permit. So the permit that they did get, which they should have needed in addition to their air quality permit, was a permit for a crushing and screening plant. And luckily for us, the crushing and screening plant permit also has some pretty decent parameters in place, and they have violated many of them. They violated the visibility limiting standards. They violated the dispersion of dust from storage piles. There's a whole bunch of them. So all of that has been submitted to ADEQ, and it seems like ADEQ is taking it relatively seriously, because they said 5 complaints had been submitted to them, and ADEQ has suspended all operations of the slag crushing facility. So right now they are not operating. It says that MRI had voluntarily agreed to this suspension, so they didn't have to force them to shut down. They asked them to shut down, and they voluntarily agreed to shut down. And they are to be shut down until ADEQ, the city of Cottonwood, and us, the people, can all have a meeting and discuss what the heck is going on here. Because a lot of what's being told, a lot of things that were supposed to be done, like air quality permits, environmental testing, phase 2 testing, inaccuracies in the stormwater pollution prevention plan, all of these things need to be sorted out before it can be determined whether or not they are allowed to continue to operate. The final step, the final place, so for help, we can go to the city of Cottonwood, although they've denied us. I am not done yet. Their response is completely unacceptable to me, and I have a lot of questions for the city of Cottonwood around their denial to hold the hearing to revoke their conditional use permit. ADEQ seems like they're on board. The final place that we can go for help, and I am going for help for us, is to the Attorney General. So the Attorney General's office gains jurisdiction in this matter if I can prove a couple things. So I believe that the city of Cottonwood's thinking is tainted. Why else would you not even allow for a simple hearing to be provided with evidence to the Planning and Zoning Board? Why would you not want us to present evidence to them of violations of their conditional use permit? What would compel you to do that? What gain is there for you to not allow us to do that? And it turns out there is a gain. So the city of Cottonwood has a private agreement with Mineral Research that I found in my investigation. It's referred to commonly as the Reclamation Fund. So in the initial discussions, the initial meetings on whether or not we were going to allow this process to happen within city limits, the city kind of had an inkling that there could be some consequences of this. And we're not comfortable with that, really. And so MRI said, we'll pay you 50 cents a ton into a reclamation fund that will reasonably compensate the city for any unintended consequences of our operation. And so it's estimated that there's approximately 3 million tons of slag there. 50 cents a ton would mean $1.5 million going to the city of Cottonwood. Now, so far, records show that they have received just under $200,000. So they're receiving their payments and have received just under $200,000. But as long as the operation continues, they will continue to get paid. Now, I went to the mayor, the city manager, and the city attorney in a private meeting, and I said, look, we need to be able to petition this fund. The citizens need to be able to petition this fund because we need the city to do independent environmental testing of the fallout zone. So there's already been environmental testing that's been done. That shows the slag is dispersing, and that shows the slag contains many, many toxic elements to it, and that it is in our children's facilities. So, but what I can go and show is different. They're gonna say, well, Jen is biased, right? So maybe what she shows us, her results of going around and using magnets to test where this magnetic slag dust, that's not good enough for us. Great, do your own testing, do your own environmental independent testing. You have received hundreds of thousands of dollars for the purpose of taking care of the unintended consequences of this operation. There has been more than enough evidence provided to show that there's probably some consequences here to compel them and to justify them using the money, some of the money, they could spend 10 grand of it and get really thorough environmental testing done of our low-income housing, our children's facilities, our park, our recreation center, our library, our Cottonwood Elementary School. But when I asked them that, they said, the money's already been spent on other things. We put that money into our general fund, and then we use it on whatever we want. So it's not being kept separate for taking care of the unintended consequences of the operation like it's said it's for. We spend it how we want. And if you want any say on how we spend our money, you can come in 2024, I think it's in like July, to our budget meeting. And residents get 3 minutes to talk and give their opinions on how they think we should spend our money. And so if you want us to use the money we've received in this reclamation fund to do anything to help the citizens of Cottonwood, you got to come back and talk to us next year because we've already spent it. Not telling you on what though, went into the general fund. So I believe the city of Cottonwood has a major conflict of interest, and that is possibly one explanation of why they have declined the hearing that I have requested to potentially revoke their conditional use permit. You see, we have a planning and zoning board that is comprised of multiple members whose job it is to hear evidence like this and to determine, and by vote, whether or not they want to revoke that conditional use permit. Scott Ellis of our planning and zoning division decided himself, without allowing it to be presented to anybody, behind closed doors, he decided that he was not going to allow the hearing. And I don't know why. I have nothing against Scott Ellis. I think he's a great dude. I've talked with him and worked with him on many projects in the past. Never had any issues with him. Never once questioned his integrity or his authority. But I do have concerns with how he is handling this. I have asked to have private meetings with him, to speak with him. I have been declined every opportunity to have communications with him. So I do have some concerns there. It's also interesting to note that the city does hold these hearings and does revoke people's permits. So Foljo Brothers in Cottonwood had a conditional use permit, and they held a hearing a couple months ago to revoke Justin's permit. And at the hearing, Justin came, and I listed for you some of the reasons they can revoke a conditional use permit, like you used fraud or misrepresentation of a material fact to get the permit. You lied in getting it, as we know MRI did. It's a nuisance to people around you or hazardous to public health. That's another foundation. The third one is you have to be operational ongoing. So if what they granted you the conditional use permit for is not operational for 6 months or more, they can say, well, you're not utilizing the reason we gave you the conditional use permit, so we then have the opportunity to revoke it. And in Justin's case, that's what they cited him on. They cited him on a violation of Section 302 for not being open for 6 months. So Justin shows up to his hearing and he says, look, I've had issues with COVID and staffing and personal issues, and that has resulted in me being closed. But this is my business. I am working on reopening and intend to reopen, and I ask that you please do not revoke my conditional use permit because that will shut down my business. And planning and zoning said, by vote, nope, sorry, you violated Section 302, so we kind of have to revoke your permit. And so they revoked his conditional use permit. So Folger Brothers is closed, if you haven't noticed that, and the building for sale, because planning and zoning held a hearing per the rules of Section 302, found he was in violation of Section 302, decided not to give him any leeway or extensions related to that, and they revoked his permit. So the fact that I asked them to hold a hearing because I have documented proof of many violations of Section 302, and they wouldn't even grant the hearing. They can grant a hearing, we can present all this evidence, and they can say, no, we're not going to revoke their permit. But to not even allow the hearing, something's very wrong there. Something in my intuition is red flagging. So that's a long story for why I am petitioning the Attorney General to take over. So the Attorney General can take over in cases like this if there's a conflict of interest. Let me pull up the complaint I'm sending to the Attorney General. And the Attorney General gains specific jurisdiction. Let me read this to you because this is important, and this is what I'm asking you for, and this is what I need from the community. Let's see here. Public nuisance. Okay. Of the criminal code, so it's Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 13-2917, public nuisance abatement classification. It states that it is a public nuisance and no less a nuisance because the extent of the annoyance or damage inflicted is unequal for anything considered to be injurious to health, offensive to the senses, obstruction to the free use of property that interferes with the comfortable enjoyment of life, is considered to be a nuisance by a community, a neighborhood, or a considerable number of persons. It says the Attorney General may bring action in Superior Court to abate the nuisance so long as the nuisance is considered to be a nuisance by a significant number of people. And so this is where I'm needing help, because when I go out into the community and I'm talking to people and I'm spreading awareness, or like I have given talks for private groups. I spoke to the Verde Valley Democrats, speaking in 2 weeks with Dr. Sina to the Veterans of Foreign Wars. I have my own volunteer group that is forming underneath me, spoken with them. And so what we need, and every time I talk to people, they're like, oh my God, it's such a nuisance. It's hard for us to breathe. There's a mom who lives right next to the pile who says the dust comes into her house constantly through the windows, through the doors, through the HVAC system. It's coating all of her children's blankets, their bedding, their carpeting. She cannot keep up with it because it's constantly infiltrating her home. Her children are constantly sick with respiratory diseases and infection. Her 2-year-old was just diagnosed with reactive airway disease at 2 years old, raised in this apartment, literally a couple hundred feet in the fallout zone of the toxic slag dust. So every time I talk to people in the community, I'm getting these stories of, oh my gosh, I had a brother that worked there who died. Oh my gosh, my dad worked there. A woman I met, her dad worked there, who quit because they wouldn't take any of his recommendations for abating the health issues that workers were having, and so he left. So I keep hearing all of these stories of people who are impacted by this, and I need that in writing. What I need for folks to start doing is, if you feel this is a nuisance, if you feel it is offensive to your senses, If you don't like breathing in slag dust, if you don't like taking your children to the park like I did, and my child got asthma and rashes after playing at the park where the slag dust fallout is, if you have in any way driven through that area or do business in that area or live in that area, and this is the area in the center of town, the area where the hospital is, most of our churches are, Verde Valley Christian Church, the fairgrounds, 6th Street, 12th Street, the police station, the library, the rec center, the low-income housing there, the Cottonwood Elementary School. If you're anywhere in that area, you visit that area, you go to church in that area, you play in that area, your kids do sports in that area. If you have in any way been affected or are concerned about being affected, then you qualify to write a statement of impact of how this is a nuisance to you. While some people are actively very, very sick from this, other people will not get the cancers and the birth defects and the other reproductive harms for a decade or two. When we see exposure to arsenic in these levels and aluminum in these levels, now I'm not a doctor, but from what I have ascertained, and I encourage everybody to do their own research, but from what I have gathered, oftentimes we'll have these exposures, like taking your kid to a park for 3 or 4 years. You go to the park next to the fairgrounds, and every time your kid's there, they're touching things, they're touching their eyes, they're eating snacks, they're breathing in the dust, they're kicking up dust as they're running around. I see kids picking up the pieces of the ground cover, the mulch that they have in the playground. They're throwing the mulch at each other, pretending they're like bombs. That's all covered in the slag dust. So every time that your kids go there, they get a little exposure. They ingest a little bit, they breathe a little bit. You do this every year. You go to that park 10 times. You do that for 5 to 10 years of their life. They get into soccer, they get into football, they're having their games, their practices there. And that little bit of exposure, because the toxic effects are stated to be cumulative, so they build up. And it can take a while for our body to fall into disease. So my concern, and a concern of local doctors that I've spoken to, is that we are going to see a significant amount of diseases manifesting for this generation of children who are in that area in the next 10 to 20 years. So just because we're not seeing the widespread disease, and we are seeing widespread disease, like I mentioned, that child with the reactive airway disease, we are seeing it, but we are not going to know the total effects on our community for many, many years to come. So if you are concerned about that and the future implications that it will have on your children, you qualify to write a statement of impact. So I'll be sending out an email, and I will also be posting this on my website. It's OCSchildsafety.com, OCSchildsafety.com, and there's a Cottonwood slag toxicity page. You go to that page. I will post what I have put together as general helpful guidelines for people who are wanting to write a statement of impact. That it has your name on it, where you live, how you've been impacted, if you've seen dust blowing off of the facility, approximately when you saw it, if you videotaped it, that's amazing. You don't have to have videotaped it, even if you just saw it. Any testimony to that, concerns that you have. If you own businesses in the area or live in the area, toxic slag dust that's coming into your home. We have pictures from businesses where it's coating their sidewalks. There are pictures from offices where it's coating insides of office spaces. So there's a lot of evidence mounting, but in order for the Attorney General to take over and to gain jurisdiction and to take it away from the city of Cottonwood, who has demonstrated that they may likely be compromised in having clear thought because they're receiving large sums of money that they're not using for reclamation purposes, that they're spending in their general fund however the heck they want on whatever they want, that we need somebody else to take an objective look at this, and that is where the Attorney General comes in. But the Attorney General will not take over this case unless we can demonstrate in writing. Me going around and talking to hundreds of people and them telling me it's a nuisance doesn't suffice. I need it from you in writing, outlining the nuisance that this has been, any health impacts that it's had on you, and the request that the Attorney General take over this matter and stop this nuisance. The ultimate goal is to shut the operation down completely and to have them do their operation someplace else. That's the ultimate goal. And I believe that we'll get there. There's just too much evidence. There's too much damage to the health. There's too much damage to the environment. There's too much proof, and there's too many people impacted for that not to happen. The only way that will not happen is if we give up and we stop using our voice. But if we continue to put the pressure on, and I'll continue submitting these legal complaints with what laws were violated and documentation of those laws being violated and what those particular government agencies are required to do when presented with those violations, there will be no other pathway if they follow their job, which I have full faith they will, that this operation will be able to continue crushing within the center of Cottonwood. So that's the ultimate goal. I think there's great hope for our community and for our cause. So we're not giving up, we're turning it on. There is a meeting that is going to be happening between ADEQ, the city of Cottonwood, and us. It will be a public meeting to discuss all of this. The crushing operations MRI is suspended from operating until that happens. I am really hoping to get the complaint with the statements of impact from you submitted to the Attorney General way before then. If I can get it submitted this week, that would be amazing. That way then maybe the Attorney General can send a representative to also be at that meeting and to go over the criminal violations. It is also a criminal violation to lie to a public official in connection to a permit. It's called unsworn falsification. It is under the Arizona Revised Statute Criminal Code, Title 13, Section 2704, unsworn falsification. It says a person commits unsworn falsification if they knowingly make any statement that they believe to be false in regard to a material issue to a public servant in connection with an application for any benefit, which is a conditional use permit is the benefit to be used. And so that is also being turned over to the Attorney General with all of the proof that they blatantly flat out lied. They did it on purpose. They knew the truth. They lied on purpose because they wanted to make the city of Cottonwood and the residents believe that they're just this perfect company that wouldn't create any emissions or hazards for the community. Because they had a perfect track record, because they knew once they got their plant built and operational that it would be really hard to shut them down after the fact. So they figured they could just lie their way through approval, and they did, and they got it. But unfortunately, that's criminal. And so I'm also asking that the Attorney General prosecute for unsworn falsification and a couple other statutes that pertain to fraud. So very, very hopeful, lots of great things happening. Thank you for your interest. If you're still watching this 43 minutes into it, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this. And if you are interested in writing that statement of impact, I will attach to the email that I'm sending this out some of the helpful guidelines for that. I will also have it, like I said, on my website. And I love you, and God bless you, and thank you, and to all of those of you out there who are really suffering, to the moms out there with children who live in this area who are really suffering, who are low income, who don't have the means to get their children appropriately treated, to continually have their homes cleaned to a professional level, to remediate the contamination, who don't have the means to move to another location, who are basically stuck and have really no other options. I want you to know that I see you, and I've heard you, and I believe in you, and I know that I won't stop until every possible avenue has been exhausted. And I think that there are enough good people in our government regulatory agencies that will hear you and see you too, and will ensure that this stops, and will hopefully also give you guys some help to get your children treated and to clean up the contamination that is in your homes and your parks. So I love you, I see you, and I'm fighting for you. I'm fighting for myself and my children and our right to live in a community that is free of this ongoing contamination. To allow this for another 10, 15, 20 years, to allow this for another year is just completely unacceptable in my eyes, and a complete violation of environmental laws. So thank you. I'll post another update as soon as I have one.